The silence in the Grand Olympic Theater was so complete that even the dust motes seemed to hang motionless in the golden afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows. 3,000 spectators held their collective breath as Melody Harrison stepped onto the polished wooden stage, her worn leather boots making barely a whisper against the boards that had hosted presidents and princes. On Naz, before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. She stood alone in the center of the vast stage, dwarfed by the ornate crimson curtains and gleaming brass fixtures that spoke of wealth and prestige beyond anything she had ever known. Her simple cotton dress, faded blue from countless washings, seemed almost shabby against the opulent backdrop. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, with a few rebellious strands framing a face that bore the weathered marks of someone who had spent more time outdoors than in drawing rooms. In her right hand, she held a single throwing knife, not the ornate, jewel-encrusted blade of a circus performer, but a plain, utilitarian piece of steel with a wrapped leather handle worn smooth by years of use. The metal caught the theater lights and threw back a cold, precise gleam that seemed to cut through the heavy air of anticipation. 6 targets stood arranged across the back of the stage in a seemingly impossible configuration. They weren't lined up in a neat row like the simple carnival games that most of the audience had seen before. Instead, they formed a complex 3-dimensional pattern. 2 targets mounted on tall stands at different heights, 2 more suspended from the ceiling at varying lengths, 1 positioned behind a narrow gap between wooden barriers, and the final target placed at an angle that would require the blade to ricochet off a metal plate to reach it. The crowd had been laughing just moments before. Wealthy patrons in their silk gowns and tailored suits had exchanged amused glances and whispered comments about the audacity of this unknown woman who claimed she could accomplish what no performer in the theater's illustrious history had ever attempted. The theater's owner, Charles Blackwood, had introduced her with barely concealed skepticism, his tone suggesting that the audience was about to witness either a miraculous feat or a spectacular failure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood had announced from his position in the wings, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a man accustomed to introducing world-renowned talents. "Miss Melody Harrison claims she can strike all 6 targets with a single blade. I confess, I find this assertion somewhat optimistic." The laughter that followed had been polite but dismissive. These were people who attended the theater to see established stars, proven talents, performers whose names appeared in newspapers across the country. They had paid premium prices for their seats, expecting to be dazzled by skills honed through years of professional training and international acclaim. What they saw instead was a young woman who looked like she had stepped off a farm rather than out of a dressing room. Her hands, they noticed, bore the calluses of hard work, not the soft palms of someone who lived a life of leisure and artistic pursuits. Her stance was confident but unrefined, lacking the theatrical flourishes and dramatic poses that characterized professional entertainers. Senator Thomas Whitfield, occupying a front-row box with his wife and political associates, had leaned over to whisper something that caused his companions to chuckle softly. The sound carried further than he intended, reaching Melody's ears with crystal clarity. She had faced mockery before, but never from an audience of this caliber, never with stakes this high. The wager that had brought her to this moment was staggering in its scope. If she succeeded in striking all 6 targets with her single blade, she would win not only the prize money of $5,000, more than most people earned in 5 years, but also a contract to perform at theaters across the country, guaranteeing her financial security and artistic recognition beyond her wildest dreams. If she failed, she would forfeit not only the entrance fee she had scraped together by selling everything she owned, but also the deed to her family's land, the only thing of value she had left in the world. The contract she had signed was ironclad, witnessed by lawyers and notarized by the state. There would be no second chances, no appeals, no mercy for failure. Charles Blackwood stepped forward to explain the rules one final time, his voice carrying a tone of barely concealed anticipation for what he clearly expected to be a swift and decisive failure. "Miss Harrison, you have 1 throw, 1 blade, 6 targets. All must be struck for the attempt to be considered successful. Any target left untouched constitutes complete failure. Do you understand these terms?" Melody nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement that sent a ripple of tension through the assembled crowd. She understood the terms far better than anyone in that theater could possibly imagine. She understood that this single throw represented the culmination of a lifetime of preparation, sacrifice, and dreams deferred. She understood that failure would mean not just personal humiliation, but the loss of everything her family had worked for across 3 generations. What the audience didn't know, what they couldn't possibly guess from looking at her simple appearance and rural bearing, was the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. They saw only what stood before them, a young woman with a worn knife and an impossible claim. They had no way of knowing about the years of training that had begun before she could properly hold a blade, the innovations she had developed in secret, the setbacks that had nearly destroyed her spirit, or the mentor who had recognized something special in her dedication to a skill that few people took seriously. The theater's orchestra, positioned in the pit below the stage, had fallen silent along with the audience. Even the musicians, accustomed to providing accompaniment for death-defying acts and world-class performances, seemed transfixed by the unusual nature of what they were about to witness. In the balcony seats, newspaper reporters from 3 major cities had their pencils poised over notebooks, ready to record either a historic achievement or a spectacular failure for their morning editions. The story was already partially written in their minds. Either unknown woman achieves impossible feat, or rural dreamer falls short of grandiose claims. Melody raised the knife to eye level, her movement fluid and precise, despite the weight of 3,000 pairs of eyes watching her every gesture. The blade seemed to absorb the theater lights, its surface reflecting not just the illumination but somehow capturing the intensity of the moment itself. She had visualized this throw thousands of times, calculated every angle, every ricochet, every precise point of impact that would be required to achieve what everyone in the theater believed was impossible. The physics were complex but not insurmountable. The skill required was extraordinary, but not beyond her capabilities. The pressure, however, was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The first target, positioned at the far left of the arrangement, was the simplest, a direct throw requiring perfect accuracy but no unusual technique. The second target, elevated and positioned behind the first, would need to be struck by the blade after it passed through a precise point on the initial target. The third target, suspended from the ceiling, required the blade to maintain enough velocity and proper rotation after the first 2 impacts. The fourth target was the most challenging, positioned behind a narrow gap that would require the blade to thread between 2 barriers with millimeter precision. The fifth target demanded that the blade ricochet off a metal plate at exactly the right angle to change its trajectory toward a target positioned perpendicular to its original path. The sixth and final target was placed in such a way that only a blade moving at a specific velocity and angle after completing the first 5 impacts could possibly reach it. Charles Blackwood raised his hand to signal the beginning of the attempt, his expression a mixture of professional courtesy and personal skepticism. The wealthy audience leaned forward in their seats, some hoping for success, others anticipating failure, all of them united in their fascination with the audacious nature of what they were about to witness. Melody drew back her arm with a motion that looked deceptively simple but represented years of training and refinement. Every muscle in her body was aligned for this single moment, every calculation verified, every doubt pushed aside in favor of pure, focused intention. The knife left her hand with a whisper of displaced air, beginning its journey toward the first target with a precision that immediately silenced the last whispers in the audience. This was not the throw of an amateur or a dreamer. This was the release of someone who had turned knife throwing from a simple skill into an art form, who had pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible through sheer determination and innovative thinking. What happened next would determine not just the outcome of an impossible wager, but the entire trajectory of Melody Harrison's life, transforming her from an unknown farm girl into either a legend or a cautionary tale about the dangers of reaching too far beyond one's station. Melody Harrison had first picked up a throwing knife at the age of 7, not in pursuit of fame or fortune, but out of pure necessity on her family's struggling ranch in the hills of Montana. The Harrison homestead stretched across 200 acres of stubborn grassland that yielded barely enough to keep their small herd of cattle fed through the harsh mountain winters. Her father, Benjamin Harrison, had been a cavalry officer before settling down to ranch life with his wife, Eleanor. The transition from military precision to the unpredictable challenges of frontier agriculture had not been easy for him. Benjamin carried himself with the rigid posture of a man accustomed to following orders and giving them, but the land refused to respond to military discipline the way soldiers had. Oh, 4. Eleanor Harrison possessed a gentle strength that had attracted Benjamin during his final leave before discharge. She had been a schoolteacher in Denver, educated and refined, with dreams of bringing culture and learning to the frontier settlements. The reality of ranch life had proven harder than either of them anticipated, but Eleanor adapted with a resilience that impressed even her husband's military colleagues. Melody was their only child, born during a particularly difficult winter when the nearest doctor was 3 days' ride away. Eleanor had delivered her daughter with only Benjamin's steady hands and a midwife's manual borrowed from a neighboring family. From her earliest days, Melody seemed to embody the best qualities of both parents. Benjamin's focus and determination combined with Eleanor's intellectual curiosity and adaptability. Knife throwing began as a practical skill. Coyotes had been taking their chickens with increasing boldness, and Benjamin's rifle was too valuable to waste ammunition on pests that could be dealt with through other means. He had learned knife throwing during his cavalry service, when silent sentries sometimes needed to be eliminated without alerting enemy camps. The skill had seemed obsolete in civilian life until the predator problem arose. Benjamin started teaching Melody the basics because she was the only one available when the attacks occurred. Eleanor was usually inside tending to household duties, and hiring ranch hands was beyond their limited budget. At 7 years old, Melody was barely strong enough to throw a blade with sufficient force, but her eye for distance and angle was remarkably accurate from the beginning. What started as predator control evolved into something more significant when Melody began practicing on her own. She would spend hours after completing her chores, throwing at targets she constructed from scrap wood and old feed sacks. Her accuracy improved rapidly, but more importantly, she began experimenting with techniques that went beyond her father's military training. The family's financial situation grew worse as Melody entered her teenage years. A series of harsh winters had decimated their cattle herd, and a bank loan taken out to purchase breeding stock came due just as beef prices plummeted due to oversupply from larger ranches with better access to railroad transportation. Benjamin took work as a deputy sheriff in the nearest town, leaving Eleanor and Melody to manage the ranch alone for weeks at a time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During these periods of isolation, Melody's knife-throwing practice became more than just a hobby or practical skill. It became a form of meditation, a way to maintain focus and control when everything else in her life seemed chaotic and uncertain. She developed techniques for throwing multiple blades in rapid succession, for hitting targets at extreme distances, and for achieving ricochets that allowed her to strike objects around corners or behind obstacles. Eleanor recognized her daughter's exceptional talent and encouraged her to think beyond the immediate needs of ranch life. She had heard stories of performers in traveling circuses and theater shows who earned substantial livings through unusual skills. Perhaps Melody's knife throwing could become something more than just a ranch tool. The idea seemed impossible at first. The Harrison family had no connections to the entertainment world, no understanding of how such careers were built, and certainly no money to invest in costumes, equipment, or promotional materials. But Eleanor was determined that her daughter's gifts should not be wasted on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. When Melody turned 18, Eleanor made a decision that shocked both her husband and daughter. She sold her mother's jewelry, a collection of pieces that had been passed down through 3 generations, and used the money to send Melody to Chicago to study with Professor Wilhelm Steinberg, a former European circus performer who had retired to teaching. Steinberg's academy occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago, far from the glamorous theaters and performance venues that Melody had imagined. The professor himself was a stern, demanding teacher who had worked with knife throwers across 2 continents. His students included acrobats, marksmen, and specialty performers who were trying to develop acts sophisticated enough for major venues. Melody's first weeks at the academy were humbling. Despite her years of practice and natural talent, she discovered that professional knife throwing required skills and knowledge she had never considered. Proper blade selection, stage presentation, audience psychology, and the technical requirements for different types of performances were all subjects she needed to master. More challenging was the social aspect of professional entertainment. The other students came from families with money and connections. They wore expensive clothes, spoke with refined accents, and discussed opportunities at venues that Melody had only read about in newspapers. Her simple ranch background and homemade practice clothes marked her as an outsider from the beginning. Professor Steinberg, however, was impressed by Melody's unconventional techniques and her willingness to work harder than students who relied on natural talent or family resources. He began working with her individually, helping her refine the ricochet methods she had developed, and teaching her how to incorporate them into performances that would distinguish her from other knife throwers. The training was expensive, far more than Eleanor's jewelry money could cover. Melody took work as a seamstress in the evenings, stitching costumes for other performers while trying to save enough money to continue her lessons. She lived in a tiny room above a bakery, surviving on day-old bread and whatever cheap meals she could afford. Letters from home brought increasingly desperate news. The ranch was failing without the income from Benjamin's deputy work, which he had given up to try to save their livestock. Eleanor was teaching at a one-room schoolhouse for minimal pay, but it wasn't enough to cover their mortgage payments. The bank was threatening foreclosure, and Benjamin was talking about selling the land to pay their debts. After 6 months in Chicago, Melody faced an impossible choice. She could continue her training and pursue the career that Eleanor had sacrificed so much to make possible, or she could return home to help save the family ranch. The decision became more complicated when Professor Steinberg offered her an opportunity to perform with a traveling circus that needed specialty acts for their upcoming season. The circus contract would provide steady income and professional experience, but it would also mean years of travel that would prevent her from helping her family or advancing to the higher levels of performance that might provide real financial security. Melody spent sleepless nights walking the Chicago streets, trying to find a solution that would satisfy her family's needs and her own dreams. The answer came from an unexpected source. Charles Blackwood, owner of the Grand Olympic Theater, had heard about Professor Steinberg's academy through his network of entertainment industry contacts. He was looking for unique acts to feature during his theater's anniversary celebration, something that would attract attention and distinguish his establishment from competitors. Blackwood visited the academy and watched several students perform. Most demonstrated competent but conventional knife-throwing skills. Melody's ricochet techniques and her ability to strike multiple targets with precision that seemed to defy physics caught his attention immediately. The challenge he proposed was unlike anything attempted in professional entertainment. Strike 6 targets arranged in a complex three-dimensional pattern with a single blade, using techniques that had never been performed before a paying audience. The stakes he offered matched the difficulty. Success would bring enough money to save her family's ranch and launch her career at the highest levels of professional entertainment. Failure, however, would cost her everything. Blackwood required collateral for the performance contract, something valuable enough to guarantee her complete commitment to succeeding. The only thing Melody owned of sufficient value was her share in the family ranch, the property deed that represented 3 generations of Harrison family dreams and sacrifices. Eleanor's response to Melody's letter describing the opportunity was immediate and unequivocal. Take the risk. The ranch was lost anyway without some dramatic intervention. If Melody succeeded, the family would be saved. If she failed, they would lose something they were going to lose regardless. Benjamin's response was more complex. As a former soldier, he understood calculated risks and the necessity of bold action when conventional approaches had failed. But as a father, he struggled with the idea of his daughter risking everything on a single performance, no matter how skilled she had become. The decision ultimately rested with Melody. Standing in Professor Steinberg's academy, surrounded by the targets and blades that had become as familiar to her as the tools of her childhood ranch, she realized that this moment represented the culmination of every choice her family had made since her birth. Eleanor's sacrifice of her jewelry, Benjamin's military training that had given her the foundation for her skills, and her own years of practice had all led to this singular opportunity. She signed Blackwood's contract, knowing that within days she would either be celebrating the fulfillment of dreams that had seemed impossible just months before, or returning to Montana with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she had gambled away her family's legacy on her own unproven abilities. The 3 weeks between signing Blackwood's contract and the scheduled performance became a nightmare of preparation and mounting pressure that tested every aspect of Melody's resolve. Professor Steinberg's academy, once a place of learning and gradual improvement, transformed into an intensive laboratory where the impossible had to become routine. The target configuration that Blackwood had designed was more complex than anything ever attempted in professional entertainment. Each morning, Melody would arrive at the academy before dawn to find the arrangement waiting for her. 6 targets positioned with mathematical precision that demanded not just accuracy, but a complete understanding of physics, trajectory, and blade dynamics that pushed beyond conventional knife throwing into uncharted territory. Professor Steinberg had initially been skeptical of the entire enterprise. In 40 years of training performers, he had never encountered anyone attempting to strike multiple targets with a single blade using ricochet techniques. The physics alone presented challenges that seemed insurmountable, requiring calculations of angle, velocity, and rotation that would have challenged university mathematicians. "This is not performance, Miss Harrison," Steinberg had said during their first practice session with the full configuration. "This is engineering disguised as entertainment. You are asking one blade to accomplish what most performers would require 6 separate throws to achieve." The professor's concerns proved prophetic during the initial attempts. Melody's first throw struck 3 targets before the blade's trajectory became too unpredictable to continue the sequence. Her second attempt reached 4 targets but lacked the velocity to complete the final ricochet. By the end of the first week, she had yet to successfully strike all 6 targets in a single throw. The pressure intensified when word of the challenge spread through Chicago's entertainment community. Theater owners, performers, and industry professionals began placing private wagers on the outcome. The odds heavily favored failure, with most experts predicting that Melody would be fortunate to strike 4 targets, let alone all 6. Newspaper reporters began requesting interviews, eager to document either a historic achievement or a spectacular failure for their readers. Melody declined all requests, understanding that publicity before the performance would only increase the pressure and potentially provide competitors with insights into her techniques. But privacy became impossible when Victor Blackwood, Charles's younger brother and business partner, began making public statements about the upcoming performance. Victor had opposed the entire arrangement from the beginning, viewing it as an expensive publicity stunt that could damage the theater's reputation if it failed dramatically. "My brother has always been prone to theatrical gestures," Victor told reporters from the Chicago Tribune. "But this venture borders on the absurd. We are asking audiences to pay premium prices to watch an untrained farm girl attempt something that professional performers have never achieved. The potential for embarrassment is enormous." These comments reached Melody through Professor Steinberg, who had been monitoring the newspaper coverage. The public skepticism added another layer of pressure to an already overwhelming situation. Not only did she need to master the technical aspects of the throw, but she now faced the possibility of failure in front of an audience that had been primed to expect disaster. The practice sessions became increasingly frustrating as Melody struggled with the consistency required for success. Some days, she would successfully complete the 6-target sequence multiple times. Other days, minor variations in blade rotation or release angle would cause failures that seemed impossible to predict or prevent. Professor Steinberg introduced new training methods designed to address the psychological pressure. He invited other students to watch Melody's practice sessions, creating artificial audience situations that simulated the stress of public performance. He also arranged for her to practice with different lighting conditions and acoustic environments that might affect her concentration during the actual performance. The financial pressure added another dimension to the challenge. Melody's room and board costs continued to accumulate, and her evening work as a seamstress barely covered her basic expenses. Letters from home brought increasingly desperate updates about the ranch's situation. The bank had filed preliminary foreclosure papers, giving the Harrison family 60 days to resolve their debt or lose their property. Benjamin Harrison's latest letter revealed that he had attempted to find work as a deputy sheriff in neighboring counties, but positions were scarce and the pay insufficient to cover their mortgage obligations. Eleanor had taken additional teaching responsibilities, working 7 days a week to contribute what little she could to their desperate finances. The weight of her family's situation made concentration during practice sessions increasingly difficult. Melody found herself calculating not just blade trajectories but the mathematical certainty of her family's ruin if she failed. The ranch that had been in the Harrison family for 3 generations would be sold at auction, her parents would face destitution in their advancing years, and her own dreams of a performance career would end before they had truly begun. Professor Steinberg noticed the deterioration in Melody's practice performance and insisted on a frank discussion about the psychological aspects of her challenge. Pressure can be an ally or an enemy, he explained during one of their evening sessions. Military performers understand that stress can sharpen focus or destroy it entirely. The choice depends on how you channel the energy. The professor's military background had given him experience with high-stakes situations, but even he admitted that the combination of technical difficulty, financial pressure, and public scrutiny that Melody faced was unprecedented in his experience. Most performers had the luxury of gradual career development, building skills and reputation through smaller successes before attempting major challenges. Melody's situation offered no such progression. She faced an all-or-nothing test that would determine not just her career prospects, but her family's survival and her own future. The contract she had signed contained no provisions for partial success or moral victories. Either she struck all 6 targets with a single blade, or she lost everything. Charles Blackwood's visits to the academy during the final week of preparation revealed his own growing anxiety about the performance. The theater owner had invested significant money in publicity and preparation for the event. Ticket sales had exceeded expectations, with prominent citizens and visiting dignitaries requesting special accommodations to witness what newspapers were calling either the most ambitious performance in theater history or the most elaborate failure ever attempted on stage. The governor has requested a private box, Blackwood informed Melody during one of his visits. Senator Whitfield is bringing a delegation of congressional colleagues. We have reporters from New York and Philadelphia planning to attend. This performance will receive national attention regardless of the outcome. The prospect of failure before such a distinguished audience added yet another layer of pressure to Melody's preparation. Success would launch her career at the highest levels of American entertainment. Failure would be documented and discussed in newspapers across the country, ensuring that her defeat would be remembered long after the performance itself was forgotten. Professor Steinberg implemented a final training regimen designed to simulate the exact conditions Melody would face at the Grand Olympic Theater. He arranged for the Academy's largest practice space to be reconfigured with lighting and acoustics that matched the theater's specifications. Local actors were hired to serve as a practice audience, creating the kind of atmospheric pressure that Melody would encounter during the actual performance. These simulation sessions revealed new challenges that had not been apparent during solo practice. The presence of observers affected Melody's breathing and muscle tension in subtle ways that changed her throwing mechanics. The formal lighting created shadows and reflections that altered her depth perception. Even the acoustic properties of a larger space seemed to affect her timing and rhythm. With 1 week remaining before the performance, Melody achieved her first completely successful throw under simulated theater conditions. The blade struck all 6 targets in perfect sequence, completing the ricochet pattern with precision that silenced the practice audience and brought a rare smile to Professor Steinberg's stern features. But success in practice was followed by 3 consecutive days of failures that seemed to occur randomly and without obvious cause. Small variations in grip pressure, release timing, or even her stance would create cascading effects that disrupted the entire sequence. The consistency required for public performance remained elusive despite months of intensive training. The final practice session took place 2 days before the scheduled performance. Melody had slept poorly for weeks, haunted by nightmares of failure and the consequences it would bring to her family. Her hands showed the calluses and small cuts that came from handling blades for hours each day. Her shoulders ached from the repetitive throwing motion, and her eyes strained from the intense focus required to calculate angles and distances. Professor Steinberg watched silently as Melody prepared for what they both knew might be her final practice attempt. The target configuration stood ready, each element positioned with the precision that had become second nature after weeks of setup and adjustment. The throwing line was marked with tape worn smooth by her footsteps. The blade in her hand was perfectly balanced, its weight and feel as familiar as her own heartbeat. Everything was ready except for the certainty that had eluded her throughout the preparation period. Melody understood the physics, had mastered the techniques, and could visualize the successful completion of the sequence. But the gap between understanding and execution remained as challenging as ever, a bridge that could only be crossed through perfect performance when it mattered most. Standing at the throwing line in Professor Steinberg's academy, Surrounded by the tools and targets that had become her world, Melody faced the reality that no amount of practice could guarantee success when she stepped onto the Grand Olympic Theater's stage. The next time she attempted this throw, there would be no second chances, no adjustments, no opportunity to learn from failure. Everything would be decided in the few seconds it took for a single blade to complete its journey towards 6 targets and either triumph or disaster. The intervention that would change everything came from the most unexpected source imaginable, a 12-year-old orphan named Timothy Fletcher, who worked as a stage assistant at the Grand Olympic Theater. Timothy had been living in the theater's basement storage rooms for 6 months, surviving on scraps from the kitchen and odd jobs that Charles Blackwood assigned to keep him occupied. The boy had lost both parents in a factory fire the previous winter and had been living on Chicago's streets until Blackwood discovered him sleeping in the theater's alley during a blizzard. Rather than turning Timothy over to the overcrowded orphanage system, Blackwood had quietly given him shelter and small tasks that provided purpose without drawing attention from city authorities who might separate them. Timothy possessed an unusual combination of mechanical aptitude and keen observation skills that had made him invaluable despite his age. He could repair complex stage machinery, adjust lighting systems, and solve technical problems that baffled adult stagehands. His small size allowed him access to cramped spaces beneath the stage where cables and pulleys required maintenance. More importantly for Melody's situation, Timothy had been watching her practice sessions with the fascination of someone who understood precision machinery. While adults focused on the entertainment aspects of knife throwing, Timothy saw the technical challenges as engineering problems that demanded systematic solutions. The boy had noticed patterns in Melody's practice failures that escaped both her attention and Professor Steinberg's experienced eye. Certain atmospheric conditions seemed to affect blade trajectory in subtle but measurable ways. Temperature variations altered the metal's properties slightly, humidity affected the leather grip, and even minor air currents from the theater's ventilation system could influence the blade's path during long ricochet sequences. Timothy's breakthrough came during his evening cleaning duties when he discovered forgotten engineering documents in the theater's archives. The Grand Olympic had been constructed by German engineers who had incorporated sophisticated acoustic and airflow systems designed to enhance performances. The building's ventilation created predictable air currents that could be calculated and potentially used to advantage rather than fought against. Working alone in the basement by candlelight, Timothy began mapping the theater's air currents using techniques he had learned from watching factory mechanics test ventilation systems. He created a detailed chart showing how air moved through the performance space at different times of day and under various weather conditions. The information was potentially invaluable, but Timothy faced the challenge of presenting it to adults who might dismiss his observations as the fantasies of an uneducated child. His solution was to approach Professor Steinberg directly, bypassing the theater management entirely. Steinberg's initial reaction was skeptical, but Timothy's systematic documentation and clear explanations quickly convinced the professor that the boy had identified variables that could explain Melody's inconsistent practice results. The engineering drawings and air current maps represented factors that neither of them had considered during months of preparation. "Young man," Steinberg said after reviewing Timothy's work, "you have demonstrated something that escaped my attention despite 40 years of experience. Environmental factors that seem negligible can become significant when precision requirements are extreme." The professor immediately began incorporating Timothy's findings into Melody's training regimen. They discovered that her most successful practice throws had occurred during specific atmospheric conditions that Timothy's charts predicted would be optimal. Conversely, her most frustrating failures had happened when air currents and humidity levels created conditions that made precise blade control nearly impossible. But understanding the environmental factors was only the first part of Timothy's contribution. The boy had also been thinking about the target configuration itself, analyzing it not as an entertainment challenge but as a mechanical puzzle that required systematic solutions. Timothy's background living on Chicago streets had taught him to notice details that others overlooked. He had observed that successful knife throwers in traveling shows used subtle techniques that audiences never recognized: blade modifications, target preparations, and environmental controls that created the appearance of impossible accuracy while actually working within predictable parameters. "Miss Harrison," Timothy explained during a late-night session in the theater, "you're trying to make one blade do the work of 6 different tools. But what if we modified the targets to work with the blade instead of against it?" His suggestion was both brilliant and controversial. Rather than changing Melody's throwing technique to accommodate fixed targets, Timothy proposed adjusting the target configuration to maximize the blade's natural properties during ricochet sequences. Small modifications to target angles, surface materials, and positioning could create conditions that enhanced rather than hindered the blade's progression through the sequence. Professor Steinberg was initially opposed to any changes that might be perceived as reducing the challenge's difficulty, but Timothy's calculations demonstrated that the modifications would actually make the throw more technically demanding, while increasing the probability of success for someone with Melody-specific skills. The target adjustments required careful negotiation with Charles Blackwood, who had invested considerable money in publicizing the original configuration. Timothy's solution was to present the modifications as enhancements that would make the performance more spectacular for audiences, while maintaining the essential challenge that had generated public interest. "Mr. Blackwood," Timothy explained during a formal presentation in the theater owner's office, "these changes will make the ricochet effects more visible to the audience. The blade's path will be easier to follow, and the final target strike will be more dramatic. The technical difficulty remains the same, but the entertainment value increases significantly." Blackwood's agreement to the modifications came with conditions that added new pressure to Melody's preparation. The changes had to be implemented within 48 hours of the performance, leaving no time for extensive practice with the new configuration. Melody would need to trust Timothy's calculations and adapt her technique based on limited experience with the modified targets. The boys' involvement in Melody's preparation created an unexpected partnership that benefited both of them. Timothy gained access to advanced technical knowledge through Professor Steinberg's instruction, while Melody received insights into environmental factors and systematic problem-solving that enhanced her natural abilities. Their collaboration also revealed Timothy's remarkable aptitude for complex calculations and mechanical engineering. Despite his lack of formal education, the boy could visualize three-dimensional trajectories and predict blade behavior with accuracy that impressed even Professor Steinberg. "This child possesses the kind of intuitive understanding of physics that cannot be taught," Steinberg observed to Melody during one of their planning sessions. "His insights have identified solutions that my formal training failed to recognize." Timothy's contribution extended beyond technical modifications to include psychological preparation techniques that he had observed among street performers who faced hostile audiences. He taught Melody methods for controlling breathing and maintaining focus under extreme pressure, skills that were essential for survival in Chicago's unforgiving urban environment. The boy had also been monitoring the media coverage and public reaction to the upcoming performance. His experience living on the streets had made him acutely aware of crowd psychology and the factors that influenced public opinion. He understood that Melody faced not just a technical challenge, but a social test that would determine how audiences perceived her background and qualifications. "Miss Harrison," Timothy said during one of their final preparation sessions, "the people coming to watch you don't want you to succeed. They want to see someone who looks like them fail, so they can feel better about not taking risks themselves. But if you can make them forget about your background and focus on your skill, they'll change their minds real quick." His advice proved prescient when advance ticket holders began arriving at the theater for pre-performance receptions. The conversations that Timothy overheard while working backstage confirmed that many audience members expected to witness a failure that would validate their assumptions about rural people attempting to compete in sophisticated urban environments. But Timothy had also noticed something that the adults around him had missed: genuine curiosity and respect among the theater's technical staff who had watched Melody practice. Stagehands, musicians, and other performers recognized the extraordinary skill required for her challenge, even if the paying audience remained skeptical. This observation led to Timothy's final contribution to Melody's preparation, arranging for supportive theater employees to be positioned strategically throughout the audience during the performance. Their applause and encouragement would provide psychological support during the critical moments when Melody needed maximum confidence. The partnership between Melody and Timothy represented more than just technical collaboration. The orphaned boy had found purpose and recognition through his contributions to an impossible challenge, while Melody had gained access to insights and solutions that transformed her approach to the entire undertaking. As the performance date approached, Timothy's modifications and environmental calculations had created conditions that maximized Melody's chances of success. But both of them understood that even with optimal preparation, The challenge remained extraordinary. Success would require not just technical precision, but the kind of courage that comes from trusting in preparation when facing the unknown. Standing in the empty theater during their final practice session, surrounded by the modified targets and armed with knowledge that had seemed impossible to obtain just weeks earlier, Melody realized that Timothy had given her something more valuable than technical solutions. He had provided proof that impossible challenges could be overcome through systematic thinking, careful observation, and the willingness to seek help from unexpected sources. The throw that would determine her future still lay ahead, but for the first time since signing Blackwood's contract, Melody felt that success was not just theoretically possible but practically achievable. Timothy's intervention had transformed her situation from hopeless desperation to calculated risk, giving her the foundation she needed to attempt the impossible with genuine confidence rather than mere hope. The blade left Melody's hand with a sound like silk tearing through air, beginning its journey toward the first target with a velocity and rotation that Timothy's calculations had predicted would be optimal for the modified configuration. The theater's silence was so profound that the whisper of displaced air seemed to echo from the ornate walls like a prayer spoken in an empty cathedral. The first target, positioned at the far left of the arrangement, received the blade's initial impact with a solid thunk that resonated through the wooden frame. But this was merely the beginning of a sequence that would either validate months of preparation or destroy everything in a matter of seconds. The blade's trajectory after the first impact would determine whether Timothy's environmental calculations and target modifications could transform theoretical possibility into practical reality. As the blade passed through the first target's specially prepared surface, it maintained exactly the velocity and rotation that the boy's engineering diagrams had predicted. The modification to the target's material and angle created a ricochet effect that sent the knife toward the second target with precision that seemed to defy the random nature of metal striking wood. Professor Steinberg, watching from the wings with his hands clenched into fists, recognized immediately that something extraordinary was occurring. In 40 years of training knife throwers, he had never witnessed blade control that maintained such consistency through multiple impacts. Melody's throw was proceeding according to principles that transcended conventional technique. The second target, elevated and positioned behind the first, required the blade to maintain a specific angle of approach while accounting for the slight reduction in velocity caused by the initial impact. Timothy's calculations had predicted that the blade would need to strike a target area no larger than a silver dollar to continue the sequence successfully. The metallic ring of the second impact sent a ripple of amazement through the previously skeptical audience. Wealthy patrons who had attended expecting to witness failure found themselves leaning forward in their seats, their mockery replaced by genuine fascination as they began to understand the complexity of what they were observing. Senator Whitfield, who had been prepared to leave early if the performance proved embarrassing, found himself gripping the velvet rail of his box as he watched the blade's path with the intensity of someone witnessing a historic moment. The precision required for each impact was becoming apparent even to observers who possessed no technical knowledge of knife throwing. The third target, suspended from the ceiling at a height that required the blade to follow an ascending trajectory, represented the most challenging aspect of the sequence from a physics standpoint. The knife needed to overcome gravitational pull while maintaining sufficient rotational energy to strike the target with enough force to continue the ricochet pattern. Timothy, positioned in the theater's upper gallery where he could observe both the performance and the audience reaction, watched with the calm satisfaction of someone whose calculations were being validated by reality. The environmental conditions were exactly as his charts had predicted: optimal humidity, minimal air currents, and temperature conditions that maintained the blade's handling characteristics throughout the sequence. The third impact produced a different sound, more musical than the previous strikes, as the blade made contact with the modified surface material that Timothy had specified. The ricochet sent the knife toward the fourth target along a trajectory that would have been impossible with conventional target materials, but became achievable through the boy's innovative modifications. Charles Blackwood, standing in the wings opposite Professor Steinberg, felt his skepticism dissolving into admiration as he realized that his gamble on an unknown performer was about to produce the most spectacular entertainment his theater had ever presented. The technical achievement unfolding on his stage was unprecedented in American entertainment, potentially launching his establishment to national prominence. The fourth target presented the sequence's most complex challenge, positioned behind a narrow gap between wooden barriers that required the blade to thread through an opening barely wider than the knife itself. The margin for error was measured in millimeters, demanding precision that seemed beyond human capability. But Timothy's modifications had taken this challenge into account, creating conditions where the blade's approach angle and velocity would align perfectly with the narrow opening. The knife passed through the gap with clearance so minimal that several audience members gasped audibly, certain they had witnessed the blade's path being blocked. The successful navigation of the fourth target created a transformation in the theater's atmosphere that was palpable to everyone present. The initial skepticism and polite interest had evolved into genuine excitement as the audience realized they were witnessing something that might never be attempted again, let alone achieved with such precision. Victor Blackwood, who had opposed the entire venture from the beginning, found himself standing in his private box with his mouth open in amazement. His public predictions of failure were being contradicted by a display of skill that exceeded even his brother's optimistic expectations. The fifth target required the blade to ricochet off a metal plate at exactly the right angle to change its trajectory toward a target positioned perpendicular to its original path. This element of the sequence had caused more practice failures than any other, requiring calculations that involved not just the blade's physical properties but also the acoustic and environmental factors that Timothy had mapped so carefully. The metallic clang of the blade striking the ricochet plate created a sound that seemed to freeze time itself. Every person in the theater understood that this moment would determine whether the performance ended in triumph or disaster. The blade's trajectory after the ricochet would either carry it toward the final target or send it harmlessly into the theater's back wall. Timothy's engineering background had led him to study the acoustic properties of different metals and their effect on blade behavior during ricochet impacts. The modifications he had made to the plate's angle and surface texture were designed to optimize the reflection while creating a visual effect that would be spectacular for audiences to witness. The blade's path after the ricochet followed exactly the trajectory that Timothy's calculations had predicted, arcing through the theater's air toward the sixth and final target with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. The rotation and velocity were perfect, the angle was precise, and the environmental conditions remained optimal for the completion of the sequence. Melody, who had been holding her breath since releasing the blade, felt a combination of relief and amazement as she watched her knife complete its impossible journey. Every element of the sequence had proceeded according to plan, validating not just her own skills but Timothy's innovative approach to what had seemed like an insurmountable challenge. The final impact came with a sound that seemed to echo through the theater like a bell tolling the end of one era and the beginning of another. The blade struck the sixth target with enough force to embed itself deeply in the wood, completing a sequence that would be discussed and analyzed by performers and audiences for decades to come. The silence that followed lasted for perhaps 3 seconds, though it felt like an eternity to everyone involved. Then the theater erupted in applause that began with a few scattered claps and quickly built into a thunderous ovation that seemed to shake the building's foundations. Senator Whitfield was the first to rise to his feet, followed immediately by the other distinguished guests in the front boxes. The standing ovation spread through the theater like wildfire, encompassing everyone from the wealthy patrons in the premium seats to the working-class observers in the upper galleries. Professor Steinberg emerged from the wings with tears in his eyes, his professional composure finally overcome by the magnitude of what his student had achieved. In 40 years of training performers, he had never witnessed a demonstration of skill that so completely transcended the boundaries of what he had believed possible. Charles Blackwood joined the professor on stage, his face radiating the satisfaction of someone whose faith in an impossible dream had been vindicated in the most spectacular manner imaginable. The risk he had taken in offering Melody this opportunity had produced entertainment that would define his theater's reputation for generations. Timothy descended from his position in the upper gallery, moving through the applauding crowd toward the stage where his technical contributions had made the impossible become reality. The orphaned boy, who had been surviving on scraps and odd jobs, had played a crucial role in creating one of the most remarkable performances in American entertainment history. But even as the celebration continued around her, Melody understood that the successful completion of the six-target sequence was more than just a personal triumph or entertainment spectacle. She had proven that extraordinary achievements were possible when natural talent combined with systematic preparation, innovative thinking, and the courage to attempt what others considered impossible. The applause continued for nearly 10 minutes, with audience members calling for encores and demanding to examine the targets to verify that the performance had been genuine. Newspaper reporters rushed toward the stage, eager to document the technical details of what they had witnessed for readers who would struggle to believe such precision was humanly possible. Standing on the Grand Olympic Theater's stage, surrounded by the evidence of her unprecedented achievement and the acclaim of an audience that had expected to witness her failure, Melody realized that Timothy's intervention had accomplished more than just solving technical problems. The boy had taught her that impossible challenges could be overcome through systematic thinking, careful preparation, and the willingness to accept help from unexpected sources. The 6 targets, each bearing the mark of her blade's impact, stood as proof that the boundaries of human achievement were limited more by imagination than by capability. What had seemed impossible just hours earlier had become not just possible but inevitable through the combination of skill, knowledge, and courage that defined all great accomplishments. The morning after her triumph at the Grand Olympic Theater, Melody awoke to find her entire world transformed in ways she had never anticipated. The Chicago Tribune's front page featured a detailed illustration of her 6-target sequence alongside headlines declaring, "Montana Farm Girl Achieves the Impossible," and "Knife Throwing Redefined by Unknown Performer." But the media attention was just the beginning of changes that would challenge her in completely different ways than the technical mastery she had spent months developing. Success, it turned out, brought complications that were as demanding as the original challenge itself. Charles Blackwood arrived at her modest boarding house before dawn, carrying a leather portfolio filled with contract offers from theaters across the country. The successful performance had generated inquiries from New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and San Francisco, entertainment venues that represented the pinnacle of American show business. "Miss Harrison," Blackwood said, spreading the documents across her small table, "you have 12 offers for extended engagements, 6 requests for traveling show contracts, and 3 proposals for permanent residency arrangements with major theater companies. The financial terms are beyond anything I could have imagined when we first signed our agreement." The sums involved were staggering. The lowest offer guaranteed Melody more money in 6 months than her family's ranch had generated in 5 years. The highest proposal, from the prestigious Orpheum Theater in New York, included a signing bonus that would not only save the Harrison Ranch, but establish her parents in comfortable retirement. Yet as Melody reviewed the contracts, she discovered that success had created new forms of pressure that were as intense as the original challenge. Every theater owner wanted exclusive rights to her performance. Several contracts contained clauses that would prevent her from modifying her techniques or developing new acts without management approval. Others required her to maintain specific appearance standards and social behaviors that seemed designed to transform her from a skilled performer into a manufactured personality. Professor Steinberg, who had been overwhelmed by requests for interviews about his training methods, offered guidance based on his decades in the entertainment industry. "Success in performance is often more difficult to manage than failure," he warned during one of their meetings. "The skills that made you exceptional at knife throwing will not necessarily serve you well in navigating the business aspects of professional entertainment." The professor's concerns proved prophetic when Melody attended her first formal meeting with representatives from the Orpheum Theater. The executives, led by a shrewd businessman named Jonathan Pemberton, had developed detailed plans for transforming her into a marketable commodity that would appeal to sophisticated Eastern audiences. "Miss Harrison," Pemberton explained during the meeting in his opulent Chicago hotel suite, "your current presentation is charming in its simplicity, but it lacks the refinement that our clientele expects. We propose to provide you with professional costumes, choreographed stage movements, and scripted dialogue that will enhance the entertainment value of your performance." The modifications they suggested would fundamentally alter everything that made Melody's act unique. They wanted her to adopt an elaborate costume that emphasized femininity over functionality, to incorporate theatrical gestures that had nothing to do with knife-throwing technique, and to deliver rehearsed commentary that presented a romanticized version of her background. More troubling was their insistence that Timothy's technical contributions be minimized or eliminated entirely. The theater executives viewed the boy's engineering modifications as unnecessary complications that detracted from the pure entertainment value of the performance. "The audience doesn't need to understand the physics involved," Pemberton stated dismissively when Melody mentioned Timothy's role in her success. "They want to see magic, not mathematics. We can achieve the same visual effects through simpler methods that don't require such complex preparation." Melody's refusal to abandon the techniques that had made her success possible created tensions that revealed the fundamental differences between her values and the entertainment industry's priorities. She had achieved the impossible through systematic preparation, innovative thinking, and collaboration with someone whose background differed dramatically from her own. The theater executives wanted to replace those elements with conventional show business formulas. Timothy, meanwhile, had been dealing with his own unexpected consequences from the performance's success. Word of his technical contributions had reached Chicago's engineering community, resulting in multiple offers for apprenticeships and educational opportunities that could transform his life as dramatically as Melody's career prospects had changed hers. The most significant offer came from Marcus Thompson, a prominent civil engineer who had been present at the theater performance. Thompson recognized Timothy's intuitive understanding of physics and mechanical systems, qualities that could be developed into professional expertise with proper training and education. "Young man," Thompson said during their meeting at his downtown office, "you have demonstrated abilities that suggest remarkable potential in engineering fields. I'm prepared to sponsor your education at the Chicago Institute of Technology, with the understanding that you would work with my firm during summers and after graduation." The opportunity represented everything Timothy had never dared to dream about: formal education, professional training, and the chance to apply his mechanical aptitude to projects that could benefit thousands of people. But accepting Thompson's offer would mean leaving the theater environment where he had found purpose and recognition. The partnership between Melody and Timothy faced challenges that neither had anticipated during their intense preparation period. Success had created opportunities that would separate them geographically and professionally, potentially ending a collaboration that had produced extraordinary results. But their relationship had evolved beyond mere technical cooperation into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. Both understood that their individual success had been achieved through combining different types of knowledge and experience, and both recognized that their future achievements would likely depend on maintaining similar collaborative relationships. Melody's decision regarding the theater contracts required balancing financial security for her family against maintaining the artistic integrity that had made her unique. The Harrison Ranch's desperate situation demanded immediate action, but accepting contracts that compromised her fundamental approach to performance could undermine the very qualities that had generated the opportunities. Bahira, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During these periods of isolation, Melody's knife-throwing practice became more than just a hobby or practical skill. It became a form of meditation, a way to maintain focus and control when everything else in her life seemed chaotic and uncertain. She developed techniques for throwing multiple blades in rapid succession, for hitting targets at extreme distances, and for achieving ricochets that allowed her to strike objects around corners or behind obstacles. Eleanor recognized her daughter's exceptional talent and encouraged her to think beyond the immediate needs of ranch life. She had heard stories of performers in traveling circuses and theater shows who earned substantial livings through unusual skills. Perhaps Melody's knife throwing could become something more than just a ranch tool. The idea seemed impossible at first. The Harrison family had no connections to the entertainment world, no understanding of how such careers were built, and certainly no money to invest in costumes, equipment, or promotional materials. But Eleanor was determined that her daughter's gifts should not be wasted on a failing ranch in the middle of nowhere. When Melody turned 18, Eleanor made a decision that shocked both her husband and daughter. She sold her mother's jewelry, a collection of pieces that had been passed down through 3 generations, and used the money to send Melody to Chicago to study with Professor Wilhelm Steinberg, a former European circus performer who had retired to teaching. Steinberg's academy occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Chicago, far from the glamorous theaters and performance venues that Melody had imagined. The professor himself was a stern, demanding teacher who had worked with knife throwers across 2 continents. His students included acrobats, marksmen, and specialty performers who were trying to develop acts sophisticated enough for major venues. Melody's first weeks at the academy were humbling. Despite her years of practice and natural talent, she discovered that professional knife throwing required skills and knowledge she had never considered. Proper blade selection, stage presentation, audience psychology, and the technical requirements for different types of performances were all subjects she needed to master. More challenging was the social aspect of professional entertainment. The other students came from families with money and connections. They wore expensive clothes, spoke with refined accents, and discussed opportunities at venues that Melody had only read about in newspapers. Her simple ranch background and homemade practice clothes marked her as an outsider from the beginning. Professor Steinberg, however, was impressed by Melody's unconventional techniques and her willingness to work harder than students who relied on natural talent or family resources. He began working with her individually, helping her refine the ricochet methods she had developed, and teaching her how to incorporate them into performances that would distinguish her from other knife throwers. Her solution emerged during conversations with Sarah Mitchell, a successful performer who had built a career on her own terms rather than accepting industry-standard arrangements. Mitchell had achieved financial success while maintaining creative control by developing touring shows that brought sophisticated entertainment to smaller cities, rather than concentrating exclusively on major metropolitan markets. The big theater contracts offer immediate money and prestige, Mitchell explained during one of their meetings, but they also create dependencies that can limit your long-term options. Building your own touring operation requires more initial effort, but it provides independence that becomes increasingly valuable as your reputation grows. Mitchell's approach appealed to Melody because it would allow her to maintain the technical innovations that Timothy had developed while reaching audiences throughout the country. A touring show could incorporate educational elements that explained the physics and engineering aspects of her performance, potentially inspiring other young people to pursue similar combinations of artistic and technical skills. The touring concept also provided a solution to Timothy's educational opportunities. The show could be scheduled around his academic calendar, allowing him to continue contributing to performance innovations while pursuing formal engineering education. Their collaboration could evolve rather than ending, potentially leading to even more sophisticated achievements. Professor Steinberg endorsed the touring approach, recognizing that it would preserve the elements that made Melody's performance genuinely unique, while providing the flexibility needed for continued artistic development. His experience with European touring circuits had taught him that performers who maintained creative control often achieved greater long-term success than those who accepted restrictive theater contracts. The financial arrangements for an independent touring operation required careful planning and significant initial investment. Melody would need to purchase equipment, hire reliable staff, and develop marketing materials that could compete with established entertainment companies. The startup costs were substantial, but the potential returns offered both immediate relief for her family's situation and long-term financial security. Charles Blackwood, despite his initial disappointment at losing the exclusive rights to Melody's performance, agreed to serve as a business advisor for her touring venture. His theater industry connections and promotional expertise would be invaluable in establishing credibility with booking agents and venue managers throughout the country. The decision to pursue independent touring rather than accepting prestigious theater contracts represented a fundamental choice about the type of career Melody wanted to build. She was choosing growth and innovation over immediate security, collaboration over individual recognition, and artistic integrity over commercial convenience. As she finalized preparations for her first independent tour, scheduled to begin with performances in smaller Midwestern cities before expanding to major markets, Melody reflected on how much her understanding of success had evolved since that desperate day when she signed Blackwood's original contract. The impossible six-target sequence had been achieved not through individual brilliance but through systematic preparation, innovative thinking, and the willingness to accept help from unexpected sources. Her approach to building a career would follow the same principles, emphasizing collaboration, continuous learning, and the courage to attempt new challenges rather than simply repeating past successes. Standing in the workshop that Timothy had established in the theater's basement, surrounded by the tools and diagrams that had made the impossible become routine, Melody understood that her greatest achievement was not the single throw that had amazed an audience, but the collaborative process that had made such precision achievable. The rebuilding phase of her journey was beginning, but it was founded on the same principles that had carried her through the original challenge: careful preparation, innovative thinking, and the understanding that extraordinary achievements required extraordinary partnerships between people with different but complementary skills. 5 years after that transformative performance at the Grand Olympic Theater, Melody Harrison stood before the newly constructed Harrison Institute for Applied Arts in Denver, Colorado, watching as the final touches were added to the bronze plaque that would commemorate the institution's founding principles. The building itself was a testament to how far she had traveled from that desperate young woman who had once risked everything on a single throw. The institute represented something unprecedented in American education, a facility that combined traditional artistic training with advanced technical instruction, proving that creativity and engineering could enhance rather than compete with each other. Students from across the country had applied for admission to programs that promised to teach not just performance skills, but the systematic thinking and collaborative methods that had made Melody's impossible achievement possible. Timothy Fletcher, now 21 and holding dual degrees in mechanical engineering and physics from the Chicago Institute of Technology, served as the Institute's Director of Technical Innovation. His journey from orphaned street child to respected educator had paralleled Melody's transformation from desperate farm girl to internationally recognized performer and entrepreneur. The young man who had once survived on scraps and slept in theater basements now wore the tailored suits of a successful professional, but his essential qualities remained unchanged. Timothy's ability to see engineering solutions where others saw insurmountable problems had been refined through formal education. But it still operated from the same innovative spirit that had made Melody's 6-target sequence achievable. "Miss Harrison," Timothy said, approaching with the formal address he still used despite their years of partnership. "The dedication ceremony is ready to begin. Representatives from 14 states have confirmed their attendance, and the governor's office has requested additional seating for the press contingent." The scope of interest in the Institute's opening reflected how broadly Melody's influence had spread throughout American entertainment and education. Her touring shows had evolved far beyond simple knife-throwing demonstrations into comprehensive presentations that illustrated the principles of physics, engineering, and collaborative problem-solving through spectacular practical applications. Each performance had included educational segments where Timothy explained the scientific principles underlying apparently impossible feats, while Melody demonstrated how systematic preparation and innovative thinking could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Audiences that had initially attended for entertainment left with insights into mathematics, physics, and engineering that traditional educational methods had failed to convey. The impact had been particularly significant among young people who had previously shown little interest in technical subjects. Letters poured in from across the country describing students who had been inspired to pursue engineering, mathematics, or physics after witnessing demonstrations that made abstract concepts tangible and exciting. Professor Wilhelm Steinberg, now in his 70s but still serving as the Institute's Director of Performance Studies, had documented the educational effectiveness of combining artistic achievement with technical instruction. His research had attracted attention from universities and educational reformers who recognized the potential for similar approaches in other fields. Traditional education separates artistic and technical subjects as though they were incompatible, Steinberg had written in his widely circulated report on the Institute's methods. But Miss Harrison's achievements demonstrate that the highest levels of both artistic and technical accomplishment require the same fundamental qualities: systematic preparation, innovative thinking, and collaborative problem-solving. The Institute's curriculum had been designed to cultivate these qualities through programs that were as demanding as any university engineering course, but as creative as the finest arts academies. Students learned advanced mathematics through calculating trajectory problems for knife throwing, aerial arts, and precision marksmanship. They studied physics through analyzing the mechanical properties of musical instruments, stage machinery, and performance equipment. But the most innovative aspect of the Institute's approach was its emphasis on collaborative problem-solving between students with different backgrounds and specialties. Each major project required teams that included both technical and artistic specialists, reflecting the partnership between Melody and Timothy that had made the original breakthrough possible. On Kurasta, the success of this educational model had attracted students whose backgrounds were as diverse as the founders themselves. Margaret Sullivan, a young woman from a Boston banking family, had enrolled to study the mathematical principles underlying musical composition. Daniel Walking Bear, a member of the Lakota Nation, had come to explore how traditional crafts could be enhanced through modern engineering techniques. Rachel Chen, whose immigrant parents operated a San Francisco laundry, was developing innovative approaches to textile manufacturing that combined artistic design with mechanical efficiency. These students and dozens of others had found at the Institute what neither traditional arts education nor conventional technical training had provided: an environment where creativity and systematic thinking were understood to be complementary rather than contradictory approaches to solving complex problems. The Institute's influence extended far beyond its immediate students through the publication of detailed technical manuals that documented the methods Melody and Timothy had developed. These publications had become standard references for performers, educators, and engineers who were interested in pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible in their respective fields. The Harrison method had been adopted by military training programs that needed to teach precision skills under pressure, by industrial engineers who were developing more efficient manufacturing processes, and by medical schools that were exploring new approaches to surgical training. The systematic preparation techniques that had made the six-target sequence possible proved applicable to any situation that required extraordinary precision and performance under stress. But perhaps the most significant impact of Melody's journey had been its influence on American attitudes toward collaboration across social and cultural boundaries. The partnership between a farm girl and an orphaned street child had produced achievements that neither could have accomplished alone, demonstrating that innovation often emerged from combinations of different types of knowledge and experience. This lesson had resonated particularly strongly during a period when American society was struggling with questions of social mobility, educational opportunity, and the relationship between different cultural communities. Melody's story provided evidence that extraordinary achievements were possible when people were willing to look beyond conventional assumptions about background and capability. The Harrison family ranch in Montana had been saved, as planned, but it had also been transformed into something Benjamin and Eleanor Harrison had never imagined. The property now served as a working ranch that also functioned as a research facility, where Institute students studied the practical applications of engineering principles in agricultural settings. Benjamin Harrison, whose military background had given him an appreciation for systematic approaches to complex problems, had become an enthusiastic supporter of his daughter's educational innovations. His experience as a cavalry officer provided valuable insights into training methods that built both technical skills and psychological resilience under pressure. Eleanor Harrison had returned to her roots as an educator, developing curriculum materials that brought Institute methods to rural schools that lacked access to advanced technical training. Her background as a frontier schoolteacher had taught her how to adapt sophisticated concepts for students with limited resources but unlimited potential. The ranch itself had become profitable in ways that traditional cattle raising had never achieved. Students paid tuition to participate in programs that combined agricultural work with advanced study in biology, chemistry, and mechanical engineering. The property generated income through multiple sources while serving as a living laboratory for sustainable farming techniques that were being studied by agricultural colleges throughout the West. Charles Blackwood had remained a close advisor and friend despite his initial disappointment at losing exclusive performance rights to Melody's act. The Grand Olympic Theater had become the Institute's Chicago venue, hosting graduation performances that attracted audiences from across the country who wanted to witness the latest innovations in technical artistry. Blackwood's theater had also served as a testing ground for new educational approaches that combined entertainment with instruction. Evening performances were followed by technical seminars, where audiences could learn about the engineering principles they had just witnessed, creating a new form of adult education that was both entertaining and genuinely instructive. The success of these hybrid events had inspired similar programs at theaters and performance venues throughout the country, establishing a new category of entertainment that educated as well as amazed. The approach had proved particularly effective at attracting audiences who had previously shown little interest in either technical subjects or artistic performances. Victor Blackwood, who had once opposed his brother's investment in Melody's impossible challenge, had become one of the Institute's most generous financial supporters. His conversion from skeptic to advocate had been gradual but complete, based on mounting evidence that the educational methods pioneered at the Institute produced graduates who were exceptionally well prepared for leadership roles in both artistic and technical fields. The opening ceremony for the Institute's permanent facility brought together representatives from universities, performance companies, engineering firms, and government agencies who had been influenced by the innovative approaches that had grown out of that desperate six-target challenge 5 years earlier. Governor William Matthews of Colorado, who had traveled from the state capitol to speak at the ceremony, emphasized the broader significance of what Melody and Timothy had accomplished. The Harrison Institute represents more than educational innovation. he told the assembled crowd. It demonstrates that American ingenuity flourishes when we bring together people with different backgrounds and encourage them to learn from each other. The governor's remarks reflected a growing recognition that the Institute's methods had implications that extended far beyond performance training or technical education. The collaborative problem-solving approaches that had made the impossible six-target sequence achievable were being applied to challenges in manufacturing, agriculture, medicine, and public administration, with consistently impressive results. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, representing the National Education Association, had come to study the Institute's methods for potential adoption in public school systems throughout the country. Her preliminary research suggested that combining artistic and technical instruction could significantly improve student engagement and learning outcomes in subjects that had traditionally been considered difficult or boring. The Harrison method demonstrates that students learn more effectively when abstract concepts are connected to practical applications that they find personally interesting, Dr. Morrison explained during her address to the ceremony. Ms. Harrison's approach to education could revolutionize how we teach mathematics, science, and engineering to young people who have been failed by traditional instructional methods. But the most meaningful recognition came from the students themselves, whose achievements had provided the ultimate validation of the Institute's experimental approaches. The first graduating class had been accepted to advanced programs at prestigious universities, hired by leading engineering firms, and offered positions with internationally known performance companies. More importantly, many graduates had chosen to establish their own innovative enterprises that applied Institute methods to challenges in their home communities. Sarah Martinez, whose family had operated a small farm in New Mexico, had developed irrigation systems that combined traditional knowledge with modern engineering to improve crop yields in arid regions. James Patterson, who had grown up in a Pennsylvania mining town, had created safety equipment that reduced workplace injuries through designs that were both more effective and less expensive than existing alternatives. These success stories demonstrated that the Institute's influence was spreading through networks of graduates who carried its collaborative approaches to communities throughout the country, creating a multiplier effect that extended the impact far beyond what could be achieved through the Denver facility alone. As the ceremony concluded and guests toured the Institute's workshops, laboratories, and performance spaces, Melody reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperate poverty to influential leadership in American education and entertainment. The transformation had been profound, but its foundation remained the same collaborative principles that had made the original six-target achievement possible. The bronze plaque that commemorated the Institute's founding bore a simple inscription that captured the essential lesson of her remarkable journey. Excellence emerges when different types of knowledge combine through systematic preparation, innovative thinking, and collaborative problem-solving. Standing in the facility that represented the culmination of everything she had learned about transforming impossible challenges into achievable goals, Melody understood that her greatest legacy would not be the spectacular performance that had launched her career, but the educational methods that would enable countless other people to achieve their own impossible dreams. Timothy approached as the last guest departed, carrying the leather portfolio that had become his signature accessory during their years of partnership. "Miss Harrison," he said with the mixture of formality and affection that characterized their relationship, "we have 17 new collaboration proposals from institutions that want to establish similar programs. The demand for institute-trained instructors is exceeding our current capacity to train them." The success was gratifying, but it also created new challenges that would require the same innovative thinking that had characterized their entire partnership. Expanding the Institute's influence while maintaining the quality and collaborative spirit that made its methods effective would demand careful planning and systematic preparation of the type that had become their specialty. But Melody faced these challenges with confidence born from experience. She had learned that impossible achievements became not just possible but inevitable when approached through systematic preparation, innovative thinking, and genuine collaboration between people who brought different but complementary skills to shared challenges. The knife that had once seemed like her only hope for salvation now rested in a place of honor in the Institute's museum, surrounded by examples of student work that demonstrated how the principles underlying that desperate six-target throw had been applied to challenges throughout American society. The blade had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when people refused to accept conventional limitations on human potential. As evenings settled over Denver and the Institute's buildings glowed with the warm light of continued learning and innovation, Melody Harrison stood as living proof that the most unlikely partnerships could produce the most extraordinary results. The farm girl who had once been mocked for her impossible ambitions had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of countless others who had learned that collaboration, preparation, and courage could overcome any obstacle. The 6 targets that had once represented an impossible challenge had become the foundation for an educational revolution that would influence American society for generations to come. And at its heart remained the simple truth that Melody had discovered during those desperate months of preparation: that extraordinary achievements required extraordinary partnerships between people willing to see past conventional boundaries, to discover what became possible when different forms of excellence combined in pursuit of shared dreams. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.